Howdy friends, and welcome back to Probably Sculpting, where today we're probably sculpting a scene from the Old West, but with a fun little twist. We'll start out by making the armature for our majestic steed, a wee tortoise. She starts off as a lump of aluminum foil shaped into a shell-like shape with some wire legs attached to the underside. Then we'll stick on the belly like a little turtle sandwich and get the pose posed into a slow gallop. Then we can start slapping on the first layer of clay, getting the general shapes built up. Since I don't want to have to pick up the turtle again, I'll sculpt the belly now, starting by carving out the individual belly plates and texturing them with soft silicone tools, finishing up by blending it all in with some isopropyl alcohol. Then with the tortoise right side up again, I'll start wrinkling up all the skin bits that protrude from the shell, using tiny little noodles of clay, blending in each to get the proper sags and stretch marks to fit with the movement of the neck and legs. I wasn't sure exactly how to best go about making the head look right, so I started out with some eyeballs and then just hoped for the best, carving out a beak and mouth and setting the eyelids into place until it didn't look half bad. Then I can start with the main bulk of the texturing, which means hundreds of little scales, carved in and softened with alcohol until I have a couple days of work condensed into a few brief seconds of footage. Then we can texture the neck and face, starting with some nose scratches, then moving down towards the body, slowly increasing the size of the scales to create a smooth transition. Then with the scalification complete, I'll press in a few toe sockets to hold the foot daggers, then begin implanting larger overlapping scales to be the rough armor on the outsides of the tortoise's legs. Then with all that finished, I can start in on the shell. Once I have a semi-symmetrical pattern etched out, I'll deepen the grooves and add some height to each scale to give them some dimension, blending in the shapes and then carving in some texture with a rough wire tool. But this isn't just any regular tortoise. This steed needs a saddle. With my work baked to save my progress, I'll add a belt loop around the belly to hold the saddle in place, making sure to add a teeny tiny buckle. Then I'll texture a bit of flattened clay with a woolly fabric texture to sit on top and protect the shell like a little blanket. After that, I kind of lost the intentionality of the design, adding little bits and bobs as best as I could to try to mimic some of the reference images of horse saddles. To add some storytelling to the build, I'll add in a couple details to the tortoise's back, like a blanket for the toad cowboy to sleep under the stars on, and then some saddlebags and sacks to hold all of the supplies. And at least one of these sacks will be filled with some gold coins to make you question whether this cowboy is an outlaw or a renegade. But with that, our tortoise is finished, and all they need is a rider. I struggled a bit to get the proportions right for my armature, but once I have something small enough I can shape it into the proper laid-back riding position, and then cover them in a layer of cosclay, thin and lanky to contrast with our thick steed. Maybe a little bit too thin, though. Adding some choice musculature on the back and thighs helped the toad become more and more frog-like. And I'm realizing as I record this script that I've been using frog and toad and turtle and tortoise interchangeably, but I'm in too deep now to change my ways, so I guess I'll just add a frog head to the toad body and blend it all in together. Then we can add in some big eyeballs and finalize the shapes of the head, adding in some nose holes and a cowboy grimace, leaving a little gap in the corner of his mouth for a special final touch later on. The back gets a plethora of toad nubbins, and then we can add in some boots to the leg stumps. For some reason, it feels like adding in the boots makes our frog feel weirdly naked. Continuing with the sparse clothing, we'll give him a little cowboy hat, making it removable so that the painting is easier later on. While I'm at it, I'll take some rejected boot drafts and make some little hands. Then I can add a thin chain around the hat band. To finish up the sculpting, I wanted to try and make some webbing between his fingers using some Fabri-Tac glue so that it could be translucent later on. But I almost immediately forgot that that was my intention, and I primed everything white so that we can start in on the painting. The toad is the simplest to paint, so I'll start there, with a green base coat sprayed on with an airbrush, followed by a lighter beige-green spray on his belly. And then some darker greens on his top side. His boots get a few coats of leathery brown, and then a dry brushing to make them look a little more worn in. Then I'll use a brown glaze to coat the surface and deepen the crevices. Next, using a watery brown wash, I'll add in some spots and stripes onto the body to break up the flat green. A quick dry brush will highlight all the warts and lumps, and then I'll paint his eyes black with gold irises. Continuing with the theme of gold, I'll use a paint pen to draw in a wing design onto the boots. With his fancy boots complete, I'll use a pigment powder to dust the leather from riding in the desert, and then give the whole frog a spray of matte varnish to protect the paint and lock in the desert dust. Next, I'll prime the tortoise and the hat at the same time, since they're going to be the same leathery brown base coat. And then while the tortoise is taking its time to dry, I'll give the hat a dry brush, followed by some leathery cracks and wear marks. I'd like to think that this hat has been through a lot with this cowboy. Maybe it's a family heirloom or a spoil from his first high noon duel. Once the glaze is dry, I'll paint the chain gold with silver highlights, and then give it a spot of dust on the brim. And then we're on to the main event. The tortoise starts off with a couple rounds of heavy dry brushing in a few different colors, to catch all the edges and textures on each scale and wrinkle. Then once that's finished, I'll start in on the detailing, picking out specifically sharp edges on the leg scales to highlight. Then the toenails get a deep black with some sooty dry brushing on a few of the other scales. For this sculpture, I really wanted to try my best to get a little bit more realistic with my detail. So I relied heavily on a few reference images and spent a lot of time trying to capture the right appearance. Painting is definitely where I feel the least confident, but it's also one of the most fun parts of the whole process. It's where the sculpture really feels like it's coming to life in your hands, like the turtle might just start moving and wander off into the desert. For the turtle shell, I wanted to paint each plate with the colors of a desert sunset, so I blended in some oranges and yellows together with each segment, then tied it all together with a faint airbrushing of brown. Then to highlight the edges, I gave it all a dry brushing in desert sand, followed by more of my oil wash. One of my favorite experiments with this sculpture was with oil washes. I'd never used them before, but now I don't know if I'll ever be able to stop. I mixed up some odorless mineral spirits with some dark brown oil paint to make my wash, and then doused the surfaces of my tortoise, dabbing away the excess. The tortoise then gets some deep black eyes, and I'll start painting the saddle. This part was the most fun, since this is where all of the whimsy and weirdness is for the sculpture. It's the part that turns this from any old turtle into a Wild West steed. I think my painting would have been a lot easier if I'd made some of the pieces removable, so that I didn't have to struggle so much to get into the hard-to-reach places. But honestly, in retrospect, I think it all went pretty smoothly. Once all the details are painted, I'm back in with some more oil wash, but starts out as a poo of paint, and then gets whipped up into a nice and runny wash to go all over the tortoise's saddle and bags, giving it all a sepia stain that makes it feel aged and worn. As the final touch, I'll use some more pigment powders to dust up the body, and then we're on to the base. Our desert sand will be made of plaster, actual sand, and water. Once that's mixed up, I'll dump it onto a block of wood and smooth it out into a nice flat desert, creating some wind ripples with a wet-gloved fingertip. At this point, I'll add in some little stones and rocks, as well as some desert grass. And we can ignore the unpainted tortoise being pressed into place right here to set the foot dents. I definitely didn't edit this out of order for storytelling continuity. The desert gets painted with a sandy beige, and then heavily dry brushed with a lighter color to bring out all of the texture and detail. Then with some more of the dusty pigment powder, I'll deepen the recesses and add some vibrancy. Then we can replant our desert grass, and make a wee cactus to decorate the edge and add some greenery to break up the desert monochrome, along with some additional plant detritus sprinkled about. Finally, the cactus gets an additional dust treatment, and a tiny pink flower blooming on top. Then we can add our tortoise, our rider, and the last final touches to fully bring this Wild West pair to life. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm back after a little break, but I have more content coming your way. And if you liked this Wild Western wander, consider subscribing. Big thank you as always to my wonderful patrons. You are the yi to my haw. I'll see you all next time.